Welcome to our breakout session on identity, language and environment. And I'm just going to kind of start by giving you a brief snapshot of what was the kind of strong findings that came through under this theme within the report, and then I'm going to pass over to our collection of responders who kind of did their own, from their own experiences and their own backgrounds, kind of responding to the themes of identity, language and environment. So we're going to have a video response from Daniel Regan from Arts and Health based in London, and then I'm delighted to also introduce Jo Micheli, who is Head of Communities at City York Council, as well as Chrissy Bonham from Storying Sheffield, who will be offering their responses to the themes. So really the focus of this breakout session is to reflect on the finding that Converge is a place-based learning environment that promotes a sense of belonging, that promotes the ability to explore ideas around personal identity further away from those like boundaries being in terms of treatment and in terms of being a service user, and kind of what does it mean, what is this environment and what does it mean for those involved. And really what we found in the research was that what Converge does is it allows an exploration and a cultivation of new identities, where both Converge students and university students feel that they are able to explore what their identity is and what it means to them. So for Converge students, many talked about how often they would in other services would fall into the trap of embedding someone within a diagnosis and being a service user, whereas their participation within Converge allows them to think beyond that and to see their sense of self in terms of, so we've got a really wonderful quote here by a current Converge student talking about how being part of the choir, being a member, being a student means that their identity goes beyond that of someone that has a mental ill health diagnosis or is a service user within a certain programme. And then another really strong finding that came through was this strong shared sense of importance around the university campus and what this space does and allows for those involved. So it's about that forming of relationships, that forming of exploration around identities that we talked about. So the really strong importance around environment and what that means for those involved. And this quote here from a senior manager at the university talking about how the university provides a space where people can be empowered to be whoever they want to be. So all of this will be in the report, but just kind of giving you an overview of what our responders will be kind of reacting to. And really that the data shows that both university and Converge students feel welcomed, accepted and comfortable within the Converge community, somewhere where they can be cared for and not judged. And this was just as important and came out just as strongly for university students as it did for Converge students. That's not to say that that all felt this way. There were some that did feel like they struggled to fully access that label, that kind of student identity, fully access this environment. And that was often down to sometimes there being an inaccess, a kind of a block with university campus or miscommunication, and that was one of the things that the report talks about in terms of recommendations going forward. So what I'm delighted to do now is Daniel from London is joining us on the screen. So Chrissy's going to kindly turn the lights off, and what I'll do is play his responses.
Hi, I'm Daniel Regan and I'm a visual artist, producer and consultant working across the arts and health sector, and I'm based in London. My particular focus is on section 4.3, which focuses on the findings on community, identity and representation. As somebody with an extensive background in community arts and particularly within mental health, I was at first touched by the feelings that both sets of students noted, a feeling of being welcomed, accepted, comfortable, cared for and not judged. And in order for participants to experience these feelings, the foundations must be put in place to create an environment that facilitates those experiences. In fact, they become guiding principles in terms of the project design, considering the experience that you desire participants to have. I also noted how important it is for not just the participants, the Converge students, but also the university students involved, and in fact all involved, to experience these positive feelings in relation to the project. They lay the groundwork for feelings of togetherness and openness. Similarly, both students noted the development of supported friendships across the Converge project, Supporting friendships across the project, such as this, often lead to informal opportunities to have conversations outside of the structured sessions, which encourages peer-to-peer support and the development of a possible legacy outside of the formal engagement in the project. I'm curious about whether there was any infrastructure here to encourage students to create friendships, and if so, how that might occur. Were project spaces available outside of sessions for people to meet independently? A key issue on any project with a group includes the complexity of group dynamics. Do people feel that they belong, that their experiences and voices are valued, and that they're part of a group? Through the report, it appears that spaces felt safe, where acknowledgement of lived experience did not necessarily feel tied to more traditional clinical monitoring or outcomes, but of being part of a community of people who may have had similar lived experiences. I noted that the first key recommendation is to look at carrying out analysis of the demographic representation of both students, looking at diversity. This does make me consider the complexity of lived experience when considering intersectionality. How can Converge support those living with mental health difficulties from minority groups, such as those from ethnically diverse backgrounds, those belonging to the queer community, or those with additional disabilities? What training may need to be put in place for both staff and students alike to understand the challenges that people face? I was also struck by the approach towards relationships that are reciprocal, enabling a feeling of collaboration. Converge's approach to lateral involvement aims to move away from an us versus them mentality, but sees value in cross-pollination of ideas through collaboration. And I wonder what further scope for progression pathways are available to Converge students. Is there a clear progression pathway in place? For the small group of participants that felt like they were on the outside looking in, it highlights the difficulty of building and maintaining a community. It can be difficult to know, consider, cater and resource for so many different individual needs. If isolation and belonging are key issues to tackle, I wonder if it would be helpful to ask participants at the onset about belonging. What makes you feel like you belong? How do you know when you belong somewhere? If feelings of separation are linked to missing communications, I thought about how it may be important to consider a multi-pronged approach to how information is disseminated, taking into account people's needs from before they begin. For example, acknowledging that some participants may struggle online and prefer information posted to them, or direct phone calls instead of emails. The use of reminders too for those that struggle to retain information could be helpful, and access and communication needs could be discussed at the beginning of the project. With regards to the notion of space, the project taking place within a university setting, there is definitely something to be said about gaining access to venues that brings prestige. This can make some people feel valued, but it can cause complex feelings for others who may not have had the opportunity to study for various reasons. Cracks may show when a project is short-term and not comparable to being an academic student, or is stated with the same parity of access to resources. How can we overcome that so that people do not feel intimidated? What additional support can be offered for them? I was really struck by the importance of identity in the project, including how university students felt that there should be no hierarchical structures between themselves and the Converge students. And this desire to be on an equal footing really speaks to the importance of breaking down this us versus them narrative, which can create stigma and feelings of exclusion. I believe that the challenge will be for Converge to grow at scale, diversifying its participants and attracting expanded buy-in from the NHS and clinical partners and its associated funding. This is a fantastic pilot that has rich potential for expansion, with tangible real-life benefits for both sets of students. And it's not just the Converge students benefiting, but university students benefiting from vital interactions that highlight the importance of humanity as we navigate through the world in both work and in wider settings.
So I think what Daniel's kind of response really highlights is kind of these really important questions that even though this research project might be over, that actually that ideas around belonging, around community and around space and around identity can be carried on within the Converge community. And I'm delighted to hand over to Jo, who's going to be doing our second response today.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Jo Micheli, Head of Communities at the Council. So nice to see everyone. I heard Nick Rowe speak back in May, where he was delivering a lecture on Converge in this building actually. And it struck me from what Nick was talking about was a great example of Converge being a human learning system. Because Nick was talking a lot about, as we've heard this morning, seeing people as students as opposed to patients and service users. And there's a really strong connection between the work of Converge and my role in the city working for the council. Because my role is very much about shifting the narrative from a deficit-based model to a strength-based model, where we see what's strong in people, not what's wrong, where we see people as valuable and not vulnerable. But I was telling a little story in the earlier breakout session this morning, which I'm just going to repeat again, because a part of Nick's in a lot of meetings with me in the city, where we'll be talking about how we see people as citizens, active citizens, as people, not patients, etc. And when I say that, you'll maybe get half of the room get it. But then when Professor Nick Rowe comes in, yeah, with his lovely smooth voice and he's standing in the city, the other half of the room gets it. And that's a good example actually of us both collaborating, operating from a similar set of values and principles to achieve that outcome that we want around seeing people, seeing humans, not patients and service users. So Converge for me is a great example of a human learning system. And I've just got this slide up to frame my 5 minutes. There's a lot of momentum gathering around human learning systems within public service delivery, recognising that we all lead complex lives. A number of the issues we face in society are becoming ever more complex themselves and interconnected. So we need to recognise that how we achieve outcomes for people needs to be informed by the voice of people themselves, and not least those people that face multiple and complex needs. A lot of those people that are students on the Converge programme. So we need to act more in a human way, where we see people for their strengths, we trust them, we trust their decision making, and that increases agency and control and choice for the person. It's also about Converge being a brilliant example of a continuous learning process that is informed by those students and the stories that they bring to that process. And last but not least, it's about recognising us not all operating within our own silos, but operating as a broader system. Because when you have a system that's anchored by a common set of values that reflect the values and principles of Converge around empathy, connection, collective power, collaborating and continuous learning, you'll be more likely to get the whole system to operate in that way and to model those values, and then we'll all be more likely to achieve those outcomes that we want for people to be happier, safer, having fun and contributing as active citizens, as students, as people, as humans, as opposed to patients and service users. One of the things I mentioned this morning again, we've been working on a new health and wellbeing strategy for the city that's in draft form at the moment, and it has a whole section on this that is about a strength-based approach, the power of community, how we all should support one another to have positive health and well-being, and for us all to lead that good life. That's a significant shift to the previous health and well-being strategy of 5 years ago, where maybe the narrative was a bit more clinical. And things that have contributed to that are organisations and approaches like Converge that model this in everything that they do. So it's helping that sort of change in narrative in the city. How long have I got, Hollie?
You bang on time. That's
bang on time.
Yeah,
I've done it again, 5 minutes on the spot. One more thing I would say though, before Chrissy comes in, is one of the biggest things that supported the sort of changing culture and behaviour within public services in the city is the power of stories and storytelling, which Chrissy's going to say a bit more about.
Excellent. Thank you,
Hello everyone, and thank you for remembering to mention the power of stories. You did that earlier this morning and it was just a happy accident and it looked pre-planned, it was brilliant. So I was showing off my seagull earlier this morning. I took this picture by myself and I've been waiting for an opportunity to show it off for ages. So I thought up this inspirational quote up off the back of my seagull just so I could put it on the screen. So please admire my beautiful seagull.
Very beautiful seagull.
Thank you. So yes, my name's Chrissy Bonham, and I do a lot of work around narrative and mental health in Sheffield. I work with a project called Story in Sheffield, which is in the University of Sheffield, and very similar to Converge, we try and get people with lived experience of mental illness or distress into the university. So we'll often have them coming in on literature courses. I do have a lot of involvement in getting them working with medical students, sort of getting medical students to learn to look beyond diagnosis and learn from people's lived experience. I wanted to talk a little bit about my story because I think it really links to Converge and what they do. I think I'm someone, if I'd lived in York, Converge would have helped me. So I've lived with long-term mental health issues all my adult life. At times they've been really serious and severe. And about a decade ago, things got really bad. And all of a sudden my story changed. So I went from being someone that sort of managed the mental health and had a decent job and friends and relationships. I went to being someone who was psychotic, who was sectioned, who lost all the relationships, lost my security, nearly lost my housing, just lost everything. And I was sort of left with this story of just being a mentally ill person that was absolutely disabled by their own mental health and also by the story they'd fallen into. You know, I fell into a story of deficit, disability, of loss. My internal narrative was just dictated to by all the things I couldn't do anymore. And that story disabled me for about 2 years. I think it disabled me more than my mental illnesses did, because we inhabit stories, we live within them. So I just lived in this story. And I had what happened one night, basically I got drunk and I was looking back through some old school reports and I saw how much I used to love writing and literature. And I'd had to leave school at 16, I didn't have many GCSEs, I thought I was quite thick. And I just had a brave moment, because I bought wine, and applied to do an access course to the Open University. And that's one of the best things I ever did in my life, because I got to experience education for the first time in my adult life, you know, at the age of 30. And it was so frightening, it was scary, but it was the first time somebody sort of helped me see through that story that I was trapped in. So through meeting other people that were interested in something other than my mental illness, other than what was wrong with me, I started to find a different story. And I started to learn to live within it and to find ways in which I could coexist with my mental health story. So that's still there, but I'm also all these other things. You know, I'm now a literature graduate, creative practitioner, do all sorts of mental health, and I've all these stories. I'm not just a mentally ill person anymore. And that's what Converge is doing for everybody who comes through the doors. It's giving them that opportunity to find a new story, you know. And I know I'm saying like stories be the wings upon which we learn to fly, but I thoroughly believe that we all just need that one person to show us that other way and say, look, hey, I'm interested in you. You know, I'm not interested in what's wrong with you. I'm not interested in what your diagnosis is. I want to know who you are as a person. Tell me about you. What did you used to be interested in? What would you like to do? What don't you like to do? You know, just someone seeing us as humans. And, you know, that is happening a lot more now, but I think it needs to be happening even more and even more and even more. Converge is fabulous, makes my heart soar, and yeah, I think we're having a brilliant day and I'm feeling really happy. Bang on. Thank you.